So we're going to be joined with an incredible leader, Jerry Speyer, uh, who co-founded one of the most iconic real estate firms, uh, uh, Tishman Speyer, uh, that has basically changed the skylines in New York and elsewhere. Jerry has been an incredible leader at Columbia, here at the business school, at the university. He's a double alum, right? He graduated from the college, and then he came and did his MBA here. He serves on our board. He serves on the trustees of the university. He chaired the trustees board. He serves on many, many other boards of other institutions in New York. He, I think, co-started the Partnership for New York and then chaired that board for some time. Um, so through his work, not only he has changed our skylines and what businesses can do here and elsewhere, but he has also tried to impact the institutions that actually try to change the world. So thank you. All right.
Sounds more like a eulogy, doesn't it?
No, no. No, not at all. So, I want to ask a little bit about your journey after business school, and then the decision to start your own firm about a little bit more than 10 years later, and so becoming an entrepreneur, so to speak, and then taking charge of something that became huge over time.
Well, my journey's been really interesting because when I started out, I did something that wouldn't be particularly notable today, but I took a job and I think I had the highest paying job in the class, and everybody, wondered how I got away with that. And I joined the company, terrific leader. I worked as assistant to the chairman, and about 4.5 months later, I quit. Didn't have another job. I had been married in business school, and I went home and told my wife that I'd quit and that I'd made reservations in the Virgin Islands for a long weekend because I needed to clear my head to figure out what to do next. Today, that wouldn't be particularly notable because people move around quite a bit, maybe not in 4 months, but certainly in 8 or 10 months. In any event, I knew that I wanted to be in real estate, and I wrote 19 letters by hand, which is what you did in those days. After 2 weeks, I received 0 responses. Say that I was depressed and disappointed doesn't even begin to meet how I felt. In any event, I eventually got another job, which was really interesting. I learned a lot, and I began to think about various offers I had received, and I got one offer to join a public company and to, have a chance to run that company in a decade if things worked out. Long story short, I did become CEO, and the one thing I realized was that real estate should not be, owned by a public entity in corporate form. Cash flow is important in real estate, though it's hard to find that these days. But the fact is that when you're public, everybody looks at net income. And most analysts don't give a lot of credit for cash flow. And so I work with a number of professionals to come up with a plan to do a public liquidation. The stock was 8 when we announced our liquidation, and we liquidated for 30. And after that, there was no more public company. no more thought of ever going public as we became successful. And here we are, in 2024, and we're still not going public, and have no view towards that. The one thing I will tell you is that I did not appreciate business school after I graduated. But as I became a member of the C-suite, I began to realize how much I'd learned and how much I took away from business school. And I just didn't get it while I was there. But, I feel very lucky to have gone to business school and to have gone to this school. And I'm sure all of you as graduates feel lucky that way as well.
Thank you, Jerry. Can you walk us through a little bit the sort of perhaps evolution of how you think about the real estate industry over the several decades? Eventually, I want us to talk a little bit about what's happening right now, but sort of the arc of activities of companies like you, both domestically, internationally, and how that has changed over time.
Real estate is the headline, the umbrella for lots of different businesses. There are probably 30 or 40 different businesses under the rubric of real estate. And the one thing that everybody learns is that diversification is really important. And diversification comes in a lot of different ways. We were one of the first companies to leave the United States and to take our wares to other places in the world. Always been my view that diversification is a major ingredient in the success of a business that lends itself to geographical diversification, as ours did. And I think that for us, it really changed, how we thought about things. And I think the executives that were with the company before we went international and those that stayed with the company after that were different people as a result. They began to see the world differently. And I think that today, unfortunately, things aren't so cheery in the real estate business because there's a direct relationship between the cost of money and the success of any real estate transaction. Of course, with money as expensive as it is at the moment, relatively speaking, it makes the business very difficult. On the other hand, great real estate endures. And it's always been my view that families that have money to invest should have at least 10% of their capital in real estate. And looking at it as a diversification, if you're not in the industry, I think is an interesting challenge as well as an opportunity. So I'm a bull on real estate that's well located, whether it's in New York or whether it's in San Francisco, which is really down in the dumps at the moment, but it's beginning to see signs of life again. I'd buy real estate in Tokyo. I'd buy real estate in Singapore. I'd buy real estate in Paris or Frankfurt. In Latin America, that's well located, and that has a real opportunity to succeed. So, there are a lot of things to do in real estate, not just building office buildings or the obvious apartments. It's a lot of fun. Anybody who wants to try it, let me know.
We talked about cost of capital, and you really talked about sort of global diversification. Where are opportunities right now in that industry? Apart from buying something in San Francisco and locking in a good price.
I think opportunity is what you make of it. And opportunity is not easy to define in real estate because there's so many different components that are important to investing in real estate. Um, you know, I've always said that real estate, and I really believe this to the core, that real estate follows the stock market. It has, as long as I've been in it. Believe me, I've been in it a long time, since I graduated in '64. Um, you know, the opportunities in real estate are always interesting and opportunistic. And how you make that opportunity is how you think about opportunity. And when I say how you think about opportunity, uh, different people view opportunity, in various ways. And there's a very interesting thing about opportunity in real estate. A lot of it is mathematical, but there's one element that's not mathematical, and that's what you see with your eyes. You know, what you see about the future, what you think about the future. And I noticed Chris's successor in real estate talked about how cities are doomed in part by what's happening in office buildings. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say, if we meet again in 5 years, that quote might be different. And I think the quote's going to be different because technology is changing the world. If you think about AI and your discussion about coding and the number of people who are doing coding, 5 years from now, there aren't going to be coders. They're going to be gone. Just like many other white-collar workers are going to be replaced by the effects of AI. And I really believe that as we change, we're going to create new opportunities. And at the end of the day, people want to be with people. So I believe that cities are going to continue to be very important.
They're also the lowest carbon way
Yes,
of
that's
actually
true.
populating the planet. So in some sense, urban centers will thrive. Um, I want to pivot back to technology and how it has transformed your industry, but I want to share a story because you said something about programming. Uh, about a year and a half ago, I was preparing to give a small overview about AI to some members of the board, and it was Christmas, and my one of my kids back then was 14, about to turn 15. He was a good programmer, and she was doing nothing. I said, "Why don't you write some code for me and go and download the transcripts of the earnings calls of every company in the S&P 500 in 2022 and look for the term machine learning or AI and just tell me what fraction of them we're talking about." On that, what's an earnings call? What's the S&P 500? I don't want to do it. She didn't do it. Okay. Uh, that was like a month after ChatGPT had come out. So I said, "Come here." So we opened my laptop. So I type on my computer, write for me some Python code. But I give exactly the same instruction. Press return. 20 seconds later, I get like 4 pages of code. It had like literally 4 typos. If you know anything about Python, you could just correct it and basically it could run. And it could run and do half of what I asked for. The fact that I actually typed the question is irrelevant because we talk to our phones all the time, to Alexa, right? So we're not that far from being able, first of all, to just stare at your TV, right? Ask an interesting question, and then get results a minute later. And that's going to sort of transform the types of things that we do, transforms the types of jobs that people are going to have, and how we work. So it is it's incredible. I'm going to tell that story again in Tokyo in 3 days because I'm giving a talk about AI and future, et cetera, and it's just technological change is accelerating in a very interesting way. But you've been, as you have told us right now, 60 years into the industry, and you have seen technology transform different aspects of the industry. You want to walk us through a little bit how that has played out?
Well, I'll give you the latest example that I'm absolutely blown away by. Um, when you develop a property in a city or in a town, you are required to follow what the regulations are that nominally are called zoning, which include how large the building can be, how tall the building can be, how much coverage of the land is permitted. It's a very complicated process. So by way of example, in New York, if you are considering assembling a block, it probably takes 4 professionals someplace around 60 days to put together all the information that's pertinent to the approval process. And then you can decide whether you want to take the risk or not. Well, as part of the company's activities today, we have a group that focuses on technology with specific reference to real estate, but other technology as well. About 2 months ago, we bought into a company which does all of this with computer programming. And in 5 minutes, they can do what it would take 4 people to do who are professionals and highly paid 60 days. Think of how that transforms the process. Amazing, really amazing. Now, there are other examples, like, for example, the Navy uses something that's called PERT charts to lay out how they program their big ships. We use PERT charts to lay out how we develop a construction plan for a little building, a big building, any kind of building. Without a PERT chart, you would have to do all of that by hand. It's like you used to say accountants put big numbers into little boxes. They don't do that anymore either. And when we look at individual properties, we can manage properties much more efficiently, and we can respond to our clients, namely the tenants, almost immediately with software that responds to whatever their requests or complaints are. That's just a turnaround story. Think of yourself. You're in your apartment. Your toilet overflows, right? Pretty upsetting. You would go to the phone, call the superintendent, who would then call the handyman, who would then have to gather up his tools and come up to your apartment, all of which would probably take a couple of hours. Meanwhile, your place is flooded. Now, you pick up your iPhone or whatever phone you use, you punch in your software, say, I'm Smith, apartment 12, I have toilet overflowing. And I bet in 10 minutes it's not overflowing. Why? Because you get an immediate response. It's all about the time that you save that is permitted by technology.
I wonder when will the software not allow you to flush your toilet because it will be controlling also every aspect of your home.
Well, guess what? It's true. Today, when you buy a toilet, you have an eye that as soon as you finish your business, It flushes. We're there.
I know we are. I was, I was, our Alexa was misbehaving about a month ago, and my wife's response is just unplug it and plug it back in. And you do that, it reboots, and then it works. And I kind of joked to her, it's like, you do know that this is not going to be possible pretty soon. It's like, what do you mean? Well, I said, Alexa will probably be controlling power efficiency in your apartment later on, and I'm pretty sure it's not going to turn itself off, right? uh, right now we have this sort of blunt physical way of, so you mentioned two things, which is interesting. Technology in running the business as becoming an enabler to become much more efficient, but then also technology within the physical plant, like it's like buildings are becoming much more technologically infused in how they operate, how they're connected, the things that they can do, and both of these are essentially changing. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and presumably technology is changing the jobs of the people that actually work in your buildings,
Sure.
and that changes how you design buildings. And
You know, when I started in 1964, most office buildings had elevator men or women operating the elevators by hand. I would challenge you to find that in any office building today. Uh, I think that what's interesting is that we now computerize elevators, and you enter the floor that you want to go to, and it immediately programs the elevators in that building to give you the one that's closest and gives you the ability to go where you're going in no time flat. So the wait that you had for an elevator then and now is incalculable, the difference in terms of time. Everything is about time and money. And that's what technology is doing for us.
we need that software. Somebody's taking notes, right? We need it in here. So before we run out, and I mentioned initially both your efforts in philanthropy here, elsewhere, but also your efforts in, how to improve civic life. And this has been a big part of your life for decades. And you want to walk us through how you thought about it and how to prioritize what you do, et cetera?
Well, let me diagram it in the following way. When I turned 40, I had done all right. Obviously, the company wasn't where it is today. That's because somebody else is running it today, and way better. Um, I decided that I'd been a pretty lucky guy, and I wanted to give something back. And I decided that I was going to take 10% of my time and devote it to the public good in a variety of ways. And when I turned 50, I ratcheted it up to 15%. When I turned 60, I went to 20%. Today, I'm retired from the company. I'm chairman nominally, but I'm really retired. And I probably spend half my time on philanthropy. And the reason I did that was because I think those of us that are lucky enough to succeed have an obligation to help clear the path for other people. And you can do that in a lot of different ways. And other than my family, I would say that's been a really, really important part of my life. And I like to think that I've been able to help other people in the same way I was helped when I got started. Nobody is an instant success. Nobody does it by themselves. You need a lot of help. It's called mentoring. So that's how I got engaged with philanthropy.
Good. So before we end, you want to give some advice to our budding entrepreneurs that we have in the audience, and lessons from your own journey, which I'm sure it must have had some interesting tight corners along the way.
But you know that. Uh, I would say two really important things. Never forget where you started, and never forget to help other people. Because by helping other people, you help yourself and you help society. And what's more important than that?
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Jerry.